Leave a couple of topics for Monday. We won't do a whole lot on Monday. I would say maybe 20 minutes to finish up, and then any questions. You know, if we still think about it, we're still, because talking about mating systems is fun, right? But also about all the math that's on there. You know, any questions you have about that. Once we get done with lecture today, I've got your next assignment. It's a mixture of life tables and exponential growth problems. It's probably just a little bit longer than your last ones because of that. I got the key, of course, and I have the calculators. And then somewhere in my folder, I've got a list so you can sign out the calculators if you want to take them and practice. All 3 homework assignments are on Canvas. You should know that because you've been submitting them that way, which we'll continue to do. But also the handouts are. So if you want to go back and print out the first one and rework it like you've never seen it, you can do that. Okay? If you want to rework the second one like you've never seen it, you can do it, and so forth. I also recommend that you go in and you look at the comments on your homeworks that I've graded already. Even if you only missed like half a point or something, go in there and see what you missed, because you don't want to miss a half a point on the exam, right? Because most of it's pretty easy. Most of it's things like label your axes correctly and stuff like that. So just go in there, make sure you're clear on what you need to do to make sure you maximize your points on this exam next Wednesday. Okay? Any questions about that? Do we have an exam on Wednesday? That's the last announcement, I guess. Okay. Then we are talking about mating systems, and we really only talked about monogamy for the most part. It's way back here somewhere. Oops, nope, we did all that. Monogamy, which is 1 male and 1 female, and they share parental care and they have a bond. And we said that in some birds, because we were kind of focusing on them, that bond can be for the rest of their lives. It's multiple seasons. For some of the birds, it's just 1 season to the next. It just depends. And then we were moving into polygamy. And polygamy means many gametes. And so this is where you're going to have a bond between an individual and 2 or more mates. And that can fall into 2 broad categories. Polygyny and polyandry. And so I always get confused. I'm using the animal, or I did when I made the lecture, it's an animal ecology textbook, and I'm kind of going with their classification system. So here's what we have so far. Our mating systems are monogamy and polygamy. And now we're taking polygamy and we're going to divide it up into polygyny and polyandry. And then we're going to take polygyny, say them all together. And we're going to talk about different types of polygamy. And then we're going to talk about polyandry and different types of polyandry. And then we're going to have 1 more mating system that we're going to discuss at the end. Okay, so that's why I wrote that on the board, to try to make sense of your notes and how I've got it arranged. If you pick up a different textbook, it could arrange it differently. Right? But this is the reasoning that they have. As we kind of review polygamy, remember that in this particular case, the way that the animal ecology textbook tends to define this is there is a pair bond. It does not have to be a long pair bond, but there is a pair bond between the individuals that are involved in the relationship. All right. So we already kind of did this, but polygyny, polygyny, which is the proper way to say it. But the gyne is what it's referring to, the gynoecium, which is the female part. So that's 1 male with pair bonds with more than 1 female. And then polyandry is referring to the androecium, which are the male parts. And so that's where you have 1 female with lots of males. All right, get back on track. There we go. And so like I said, we're going to start with types of polygyny. And so the first type of polygyny I have up here is resource defense polygyny. Resource defense polygyny. And these names often will give away what's happening if you know what the words mean anyway. And so in this case, they are defending resources that the female needs. Defending resources that the female needs. A classic example of this is red-winged blackbirds. And red-winged blackbirds defend large territories if they can. So they kind of compete to get a territory. And then, however large their territory is, and however many resources they have, determines how many mates they'll have. And so if you're a first-year male and this is your first time setting up a territory and maybe you're not all that good at defending it yet, you may only be able to monopolize enough space for 1 female. effectively making them monogamous, right? If they can only monopolize one female. And if you have a more experienced or a male that's just chock full of testosterone or whatever it is that causes him to be super aggressive, and he's able to defend a larger area, then he may have 2, 3, 4 mates in his area. In this particular case, let's say we have a very dominant male and he's got 4 females nesting on his territory. He helps out all 4 of them to some extent. It is a pair bond. He's in a relationship with all 4 of them. Not relationship like us, like bringing flowers, but you know what I mean. Okay? And so that one is resource defense polygyny. He's defending the resources, and that is what the females want. And so they're choosing him based on the resources he can provide. So the red on the red-winged blackbird, because you'll see them get all aggressive, right? And you'll see them do their shoulders like this, except it's actually their elbows, but whatever. So they'll do this, and they'll show those bright red epaulets. That's generally directed towards other males. That's the way they establish their territory. The females are selecting based on some other traits. What's going on in that picture of the egg there? Yeah, I took that picture at Reelfoot. If you look closely behind it, there's several things that caught my attention to that nest. We were canoeing, and it was about this far off the water. And I thought that was extremely dumb, because just a fishing boat coming by with this, without, could create enough wake to overtop the nest. So it was just barely off the water. And then in this nest, the blue egg with the black splotches, that's actually the red-winged blackbird egg. So it's got 2 cowbird eggs in it. The cowbird eggs outnumber the red-winged blackbird eggs. I never found this nest again. I have a strong suspicion it was unsuccessful. Because this is also spring, so storms would happen too. I mean, there's so many things. If you put your nest this far off the water, that's gonna take care of that. But what the red-winged blackbirds do is they pull, you can see that something like sawgrass together, and then they build their nest. Most of the time they're a couple of feet off the water, and they are hard to find because they pull the living grass in around their nest. That one was just kind of lame, not doing very well. Easy to find, which is probably why it has 2 cowbird eggs in it. All right, our second type of polygyny is called female defense, also sometimes called harem defense polygyny. You're probably somewhat familiar with the term harem. And so in this case, the males aren't controlling the resources. In fact, in a lot of situations, the females are the ones who are collecting the resources. But they're controlling access to the females. So they're directly controlling access to the females. So it goes on to say that's because the females are gregarious. That just means that they hang around in groups. Another example that's not on this slide might be like a pride, right? How many adult males are in a lion pride? 1, right? But the females all hunt together, live together. They are gregarious by nature. Bless you. Salute, gesundheit. And that allows them to monopolize the females. I think I've talked about sea lions in here. This is a picture from Galapagos that I took. I'm not a huge fan of the sea lions because they smell. And it was not the most pleasant part of our trip to Galapagos. But what you see in the middle is the male. He's up, he's vigilant, he's looking around, and then you see the females and some young ones around him. He will defend his harem and keep the other males away from his females as long as he can. But during that time, as I think I said before, they don't eat, they don't rest. And so eventually they get exhausted, and then it makes it easier for another male to displace him and come in and take over his harem. And then it's okay. He goes out to the ocean, refeeds, refuels, sleeps, rests, and then comes back, essentially. Yep.
This is kind of messed up, but do you know if they have like the same kind of behavior where if another male does take over, they'll like kill the offspring of the recent male?
I haven't heard anything about that with sea lions. That doesn't mean it's not happened. That's kind of a lion trait. To kill especially the male cubs. And then I don't know as much about horses, but I took that picture on top of Cotopaxi in Ecuador, so I put it in there. Those are wild horses and elk, but apparently they also do this type of thing. Females, they protect harems of females. Okay. Then we get into, still in their types of polygyny, male dominance polygyny. Male dominance polygyny. And this one is a little weirder, doesn't match its name quite as well, I don't think, but so they can't monopolize the females. The females are too spread out for that. They're not gregarious, so they can't monopolize the females. They can't monopolize the resources for whatever reason. And so this is where we get into leks. And a lek is where all the males have gathered at a specific location, and they're going to display. They're going to do their best dance, whatever it happens to be. And then the females come into the lek, and they'll select who they want to mate with. And we're going to talk about some hypotheses Monday. I put that into Monday. Where they explain why leks might occur. So I don't want to overstep too much on this slide right now. But just to get you an idea of why this falls under polygyny, because it does seem kind of strange, because the males are all just dancing, the females walk in and choose their mate. But what happens is there's usually one or two exceptionally gorgeous dancing males. Sounds weird. And most of the females want to mate with him. And so the females will go and they'll tap him on the shoulder. They'll go over to the bushes and have whoopee. And then he'll go back to the lek, and then she'll move on along her way. And then they kind of repeatedly pick the same male over and over. And so the majority of the copulations go to a small number of males on the lek. That's what's making it polygyny. So you have one male, and when he's in the bushes, it's like that Meatloaf song. Do y'all even know that? Love by the Dashboard Light? Nobody? Y'all should listen to it. It's a good song. But he tells her anything she wants to hear that night. For reasons it should be obvious if you're under a dashboard light. So that's what's happening in the bushes. So he's bonding and making promises to her, and then he ditches her after that. Right? That not in the Meatloaf song, by the way. He stays with her forever till the end of time, which is the end of the song. Yep. He's kind of bitter about it though. But it's still a fun song. And so when we do I have the stats in there? Remember, I don't think I do. I think the stats on Peacock says one male gets something like 94% of the copulations, something like that. It's really high. And so the rest of the males are hanging out around the main males because he is busy, right? He's constantly going over to the bushes. And so while he's doing that, they're hoping the other females might select some of them. This is pretty common. This is sage grouse in the picture. It's kind of hard for me to see on my slide. It might be hard for y'all. These are all the males, and there is a female right here in the picture, walking around amongst them. And you can see they all get kind of interested in that, and they'll all go towards her. I don't know. I don't think some of y'all wild turkey people, are they considered lekking or no? They crack me up. I don't think they really truly lek though.
I wouldn't think so.
No. But they will. But the males will be displaying, and the females will come and go. I guess is what I'm thinking, because I've seen them do that. I see you're thinking about it too.
Yeah.
I've never seen them listed as lekking per se, but they act very much like these, and they're related, right? They're related to prairie chickens, sage grouse, because I have them by my house, and the males will get out in the field, and they'll floop up and start displaying, which is awesome. I love it. Sure, you love it too, since you perked up. And one day I was out there. When I drive by, I'm not a threat whatsoever, but I guess they just can't realize that, and the females will start going into the woods away from the males. And so the two males were following the females into the woods, and they had deflated. And then every once in a while, when the females would look back at him, and he'd go instantly. And then she'd turn around towards the woods and walk off, and he'd be like. And then when the females would turn around and go, it's cracking me up. Wish I had a video. It was a little bit too far for me. Yeah.
I'm assuming this is only like, I guess, 4 birds?
No, actually this is very common in insects. But there are a lot of birds that do it. Oh, I didn't tell you my favorite one. It's not on this slide. You might know what my favorite lekking bird is? The best name, the cock of the rock. That's my favorite lekking bird. It's a South American bird. It's just got an awesome name. And I never have found a really good video of their leks, and it's probably because they're not out in the open. They're in the cloud forest, actually, not rainforest. They're in the cloud forest at high elevations in the Andes. So that makes it a little bit more difficult to get a video like this, or like peacocks that are in more of an open area. You can see the males. What now?
They stand on rocks.
No, they kind of hang from trees, branches. I don't know where they get the name Cock of the Rock. And I'm sure that's a Englishified, I don't know if it's Americanified or just Englishified version. I'm sure they have a local Spanish name. There's a lot of really weird birds in the cloud forest. All right. So we're going to talk more about leks on Monday a little bit. And I'll see if I can figure out more how they classify turkeys yet. All right. Types of polygyny continued. So this is our last one. I think we did 4 total types of polygyny. This one's fun. This is an explosive breeding assemblage. This is where both sexes converge for, I love this, I'm going to read it, short-lived, highly synchronized mating period. Spring break, woohoo! Short-lived, highly synchronized mating period. So the females are only receptive during a brief time. They all go to the same place. This is, frogs are a great example. Insects are another good example of this. The picture here are some kind of weird frog. It's not a native frog, it's a weird color. I don't think we have any of that color. This is often associated with ephemeral habitat features, I guess, vernal pools, spring pools, things like that. The amphibians like to use temporary water sources in the spring because they don't have fish in them, which will come and eat their eggs. And so if they can get a little temporary pool, then there are no fish in it. That's a little bit safer for their offspring. This is still under polygyny, meaning that when he grabs her around the waist and they are together, there's a brief pair bond. We're going to get to one later where there's no pair bonds. This one's still implying that there is at least a brief connection between the male and the female in this particular case. It'd be fun to come up on that pond, though. They look like big neon frogs. It'd be awesome. Okay, I can see the next slide that's coming up. We're going to switch to polyandry. Any questions about polygyny before we do that? I just got to warn you in advance, it's got the most adorable baby bird ever on it. The closest we come here is killdeer. But killdeer don't have those super long toes that they're awkwardly walking around with. All right, so we're into polyandry now. So polyandry, we're going to talk about types of polyandry. I think we're only going to talk about 2 types of polyandry. The first one is the resource defense polyandry. And so this is very similar to the red-winged blackbirds, where we started out today, except that the female is the one that's monopolizing the resources that the males need. Now remember what I mentioned about polyandry last time when we looked at the picture of the seahorse? Polyandry typically occurs when you have a role reversal, so that the female here is taking on the role of territorial defense, and the male is taking on the role of caring for the nest and the offspring. And so if you have highly competitive females, they can monopolize enough area, enough resources to have more than one male that she sets up on her territory. The classic example of this is the jacana, which is what this picture is. These are jacanas. They're also called lily pad walkers, which is easier to say in some ways. And they're really, really, really long toes that you can see in both the adult and the baby there. Allows them to spread out their weight and walk on top of the lily pads without pushing them into the water. We have several different species of them, but they're divided into 2 groups. So you have a South American group and you have an African group, which is kind of interesting. They look very similar. Like our killdeer, as soon as the egg hatches, the offspring are able to get up and run around, and that's what makes them so adorable. So that's a fairly recently hatched baby jacana. You also see on this slide and the next slide, a lot of our shorebirds. Those are the wading birds that are really hard to identify from one another that you see walking around mud flats, or the ones that run up and down the beach when you go to the beach. Lots of them have very strange mating systems, and the spotted sandpiper in particular falls into this category. All right. The second one is where the females don't defend the resources, but they interact among themselves to limit access to males. And so if you think about what that's trying to tell you, is this is basically a male harem instead of a female harem. Right? So they're monopolizing a group of males, that's their males. And then they have those males do all the parental care and all that kind of stuff for them, while they defend their harem of males, essentially. This is a redneck phalarope in the picture, if you want to know what a phalarope looks like. I'm sure there's more than just birds that fall into this category, but like I said, the shorebirds have some really weird mating systems. All right. Any questions about polyandry? We have role reversal to get polyandry. Okay. So then we have one more category. So just to be complete, I'm going to add it over here so we can kind of see how it goes. So we go back over here, promiscuity. Promiscuity. And I forgot to warn you, here are starfish having sex. They are apparently promiscuous. And so the difference, by definition, is in these two, you're supposed to have legitimate pair bonds with the mate. And in this one, there are no pair bonds. It's just a free-for-all. The males and females copulate with whoever they bump into. This is more of you throw all your keys in a big bowl and you pull out somebody's keys, right? Key parties. Which for some reason get talked about more now. But it's more of like a 60s thing. And there are a lot of species, of course, that would technically kind of fall into this category, and a lot. So, for example, one animal that comes to mind, we don't talk about marine animals a lot, but like sponges. So how do sponges reproduce?
Budding.
What now?
Budding. Like asexually through budding.
I suspect some of them can do that. There's a lot of weird things about sponges, but generally they just pump their gametes into the water, right? And so the male pumps the sperm into the water, and then the female gets the sperm into their body because they're constantly bringing water in through their body. I probably did that at some point. Comes in through the sides of the sponge and out through the top. And so that's how the sperm get into the sponge, and then it fertilizes the egg. And she probably never even meets the male, right? I don't even know if sponges can meet or if they care about meeting. But that would also be promiscuous, right? They don't have any type of pair bond. They are doing sexual reproduction. They're just spewing their gametes to whatever female will pick them up, basically. That's what sponges do. Okay. So I have this picture, and I want to talk about it for a minute because it can be a little bit confusing in the way that they're doing it. But this is supposed to be like a little summary of the mating systems. And so they're classifying at the top monogamy, where you have one male pair bonded to one female. That's monogamy. And then you kind of, what they've done, I wish they kind of put it up a little bit higher so you could see it was kind of separate, is you kind of have monogamy with cheating, right? That's what the cardinal's doing. And so basically what that's implying with the way that they have this diagram drawn is the cardinal, you're going to have one male that belongs to that nest, like we talked about. You have one male that stays home, takes care of the nest. The male and female are a partnership. They're working together to try to make that nest successful. But then you have the extra pair copulations where there's cheating. And this is suggesting that when they cheat, they may not truly have a pair bond with whoever they're cheating with. They're just after, for the female's point of view, they're just after genetic diversity for their offspring. So that's not truly polygamy, right? It kind of is, but kind of not. It's kind of cheating monogamy. Gray areas. That's the way life is anyway, right? Any type of biology, especially when you talk about behavior and ecology, there's always gray areas. And then you have kind of the true polygamy over there, specifically polygyny, where you have the red-winged blackbird with one male and lots of females. And then you have true polyandry over here with one female and lots of males. And that's another species of junco. I'm not sure what they have at the top. I'm going to say scrub jay.
That's what I was thinking.
And then red wing and cardinal. All right. Any questions about the mating systems and the way I've got them organized anyway?
I'm always disappointed you don't have like a photo of the male jackanow with all his kids under his wings.
Oh yeah, that's probably because I'm just obsessed with the kids. I probably have some very blurry photos because I've seen, I think, at least 3 different species on my life list. Because I've been to both. I've seen them in Africa and I've seen them in South America. All right, so next we're going to talk a little bit about sexual selection. I mentioned this that we were going to do it a little bit. First, to kind of remind you about natural selection and sexual selection. So natural selection is traits that increase your survival, your ability to survive. So natural selection is generally selecting for a billion different things. But your classic examples I tell freshmen in biology are things like speed if you are prey and you need to escape a predator, camouflage, that kind of stuff. That'll help you blend into the environment better. But it's also things like your ability to gather food or secure a safe nesting site, roosting sites. You know, it's all kinds of things that make you successful. And when Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, the vast majority of that book is about natural selection. That's what most of the book is about. At the very end of the book, though, he addresses characteristics that don't seem to have any type of increasing survivorship. In fact, they seem the opposite, like they would decrease your survivorship. And he used things like the peacock's tail as an example. And so if you're a male peacock walking around like this all the time, which they don't, you see they fold it. But if they walked around like this all the time, that's making them way more obvious and conspicuous to predators than you should be. And then you also see things that are different between the male and female, like you'll see the in white-tailed deer, males have antlers, females don't. Antlers can get caught in stuff. My favorite is out west when one of them has a tumbleweed stuck on their antlers. That cracks me up. And when they get their antlers tied up and stuff and it, you know, threatens them, I don't like that. But for whatever reason, I get amused when I see a tumbleweed stuck on one of their points. But that's not great for them. They can get hung up and stuff. So why would you have these traits that seemingly don't adapt you to your environment? And that's where sexual selection comes in. And so sexual selection are traits that increases your chances of having sex and providing offspring to the next generation. Okay? That's what sexual selection is about. And so sexual selection leads to things such as sexual dimorphism. And so di means to. Morph, when you use it as a noun, means form. If you use it as a verb, it means to change form. But as a noun, it means form. And so what this literally means is 2 forms. One form for the male and one form for the female. And so as you're looking at the definition on this slide, it mentions that we're really talking about differences in the secondary sex characteristics. So what are your primary sexual characteristics?
Your like actual genitalia.
Yes, your actual genitalia is your primary sexual characteristic. So these secondary sexual characteristics would be things like beards, your body shape, for timbre of your voice potentially, all kinds of different things. And some animals are much more strongly sexually dimorphic than others. So I have pictures of ostriches here. This is a female ostrich. This is the male ostrich. And they are awesome. And if you take ornithology, I'll show you a cool video of them reproducing or having sex, I guess. But I don't like to show it in all my classes. You got to have something to make you come back, right? Or you can just Google it later. But it's pretty good. If you watch their mating dance, it's pretty awesome. But there's lots of differences. I just mentioned the white-tailed deer. Lions, the male has a mane, female doesn't have a mane. There's all kinds of different examples. Rhinoceros beetles, since we should be talking about insects more probably. The male has the horn, the female doesn't have the horn. All right, so this talks just generally about what's driving or leading to what's happening. And so from the point of view of the female has a larger energy investment in the offspring than the male. This even comes about with the formation of the gametes itself. And so even if they fall into the category of promiscuity and all they're really doing is producing some eggs, and then maybe they have zero parental care following the production of eggs, they still have to produce an egg. And so I'm sure you've talked about this before, but eggs are giant and sperm are teeny tiny, right? And so if we look at the human cycle, which most people are more familiar with, female women, from the time they reach puberty until they hit menopause, they have the possibility of 1 egg per month. And I say the possibility because not every month does the egg make it from her ovary into her reproductive tract. Sometimes they just fall into her abdomen, which is why you don't get nervous if you don't get pregnant the first time you try. And so you have 1 chance per month. Okay? How many, this is probably a bad question, how many chances does a male have per month? I'll say it's a bad question.
To me.
Huh?
To me.
Yeah, to produce offspring.
Endless amount.
Yeah. Maybe not quite endless. There's probably some physical limitations. But yeah, I mean, if you compare an egg, the female provides all of the cytoplasm, all of the organelles, all of that is provided by the female. The sperm is a packet of DNA, a little stack of mitochondria to power the flagella. All of the excess cytoplasm that they can possibly take off of the egg or the sperm is taken off, so there's very little cytoplasm, and then a tail. That's it. That's all the sperm is. All of the resources that can be taken away from the cell and the sperm still be functional is taken away. So it's just basically a little packet of DNA with a tail that's super small. And they can produce them by the thousands, right? And they don't have any limitations. They also don't go through menopause, and so they can have children all the way up to the end of their life, potentially. From the time they also have to go through puberty and then to the end of their life, right? And so because of this difference in investment, which can be dramatically different, if you look at mammals, it's dramatically different. The female produces the egg, goes through the pregnancy, and then lactates and feeds the offspring after that. That's a huge investment, and that makes them very picky about who they're going to mate with. Okay? So they're going to be very selective. That's because you want to make sure that your offspring has the best genetic possibility of surviving and going into the future as they can. All right. On the other hand, males have a very, very small energy investment. And so, since their energy investment is so small, they're generally not as picky about who they'll mate with. And as we've been talking about, in many species, the males will mate with as many females as they can convince to mate with them. And so that last bullet is important, and that is that the males are limited by their ability to compete with other males for attention of the females. So he's got really 2 hurdles he has to overcome. 1, the female has to be interested in him. And then 2, he has to be competitive with the other suitors, the other potential mates. Which leads us to the 2 driving forces in sexual selection. And that is female choice, which is the stronger of the 2. Ultimately, she's the one who decides. And male-male competition. So competition between males for the attention of the females. We're going to start by talking about female choice for a few minutes. cartoons on here for you for this one. And so in terms of female choice, we can divide the behaviors that we see in animals into kind of two categories. Your non-genetic benefits, which are basically gifts. In this case, the gifts can be anything from a rock. That's what penguins do, right? They bring a rock. Very similar to what humans do when they bring a diamond, which is also kind of a rock. It can be a food item. And that food item could be something they collect all the way up to their own lives, which is what we're seeing on this slide a little bit. This one brought a gift, I think. And this is a male whose life is in peril. And so the females are going to choose their mate based on the gift they bring. And so are they going to be a good, maybe it's skills that they bring to the table. Are they going to be a good parent? The gift, we assume the gift is some type of symbol of their ability to collect resources, food, for example. But even as we're thinking about these types of things, it's hard to fully remove these non-genetic benefits that we're talking about on this slide to genetic benefits. Because if you're the male who brings the biggest gift, that could also potentially say something about your genetics and your ability to do that, right? So it's hard to completely separate them. But just generally speaking, what this is talking about is not the genes that they bring to the table, but the things that they bring before that. Okay? Does that make sense? And not blue genes, genetic genes. All right, so let's talk about genetic benefits. And there's a lot of discussion about this. You may have heard it before, and that is maybe they're selecting their mate based on him having good genes. Good being in quotes there, because at the end of the day, as a human looking at a situation of different species, it's hard for us to determine what's good and what's bad, essentially. But I do want to give you an example. We're going to stay with insects for once. We're going to look at Drosophila. So they did an experiment in which they divided Drosophila, which are fruit flies, into two groups. And so you had one group of fruit fly where you had a female, and in the little test tube with her, you gave her a whole bunch of potential mates, and she got to choose who she wanted to mate with. And then in another test tube, you put in one female, and then you selected a male at random, and they had a shotgun wedding. That was her only option. That could be really rough on the male, though, right? Because her option is either to have sex with him and have offspring, or not have babies. That would be kind of rude to the male, right? Luckily, Drosophila are pretty driven to have babies. And so they then took the offspring from the two groups, from the no-choice group and from the choice group, put them into the same container so that they would be competing with each other. And what they found is that the offspring of the choice group did consistently better than the offspring of the no-choice group. And so what they argue, it's hard to argue these things when you're talking about sexual selection, but what they argue in the paper that they published is that the females choose based on good genes, and that gave their offspring an advantage over the offspring from the females who did not get a chance to choose. Now, this last part of this line is very important because it points out that they can't eliminate male-male competition. So they're trying to decide whether female choice is giving their offspring a genetic benefit. That's the goal. If you read their paper, their hypotheses and their goals would be centered around that question. But anytime you put a group of males together, there's no way to keep them from competing with one another. And so if you had a test tube with one female fruit fly and 10 male fruit flies, we probably don't have any real good idea on how she selected her male. Did the males all fight with each other? Were some of them pushed to the side, held behind the rest so she couldn't see him? So we just don't know. It's hard to uncomplicate those two things. Any questions about female choice? All right, let's talk about male-male competition. This is where two males fight for access for a female. And just like when we talked about fighting before, most of this is stereotyped or ritualized. They're not really, there's real testosterone and real aggression associated with it. But the way that they're going about the fight is, over time, that behavior has evolved to limit the chances of them getting injured. There's always a chance they could get injured, but it's limited their chances of getting injured. And so we already talked about the bighorn sheep. They come up to each other, butt their heads, and that's going to allow them to assess the strength of their opponent. And usually, might have to butt a couple of times, but usually one of them would be like, yeah, he's the better man today, and walk away. So the white-tailed deer, they come up and they lock their antlers, push and shove, right? And hopefully, again, they don't get injured. It can escalate, though, if you have, if they are competitive males with no clear winner, then it could continue to escalate. But generally speaking, they're not really trying to kill each other. All right. And the other thing about male-male competition is we kind of start out with this idea of fighting, but it's not always directly fighting each other in which you have male-male competition. So you can also be sneaky, for example, and there are other types of strategies. So I want to give you some other examples. One of the big areas of research in this category is sperm competition. That sounds like the sperm go to the Olympics, right? Whoever gets the gold medal. That's not really what it is. Sperm competition just means the winner is the sperm that fertilizes the egg. That's all it is in basic terms. Okay, and so it's whichever male sperm is the final one that actually gets in there and fertilizes the egg is the winner of the sperm competition. Okay. And so there are a lot of different examples I'm going to give you here, some weird ones, because I just want you to think about it. And so dragonflies have, you probably, at least in my class when I do, what is it? Prezygotic reproductive barriers. That's what it is. Woo! You had to push the right button in there. I talk about mechanical isolation, the parts not matching up. And when I talk about that, I talk about dragonflies because they have what's called lock and key genitalia, where the female's reproductive tract is the lock, and the male's reproductive structure, which I don't believe is a penis. That's not strictly mammalian, but that refers to something very specific. Has to have the particular shape. In other words, it's the key. And so if it doesn't have the particular shape, then he won't be able to enter into the female's reproductive tract. So they've already got that going on. There's a lot of adornments on his reproductive structure that he's going to insert into the female. And so along with it being a particular shape, a lot of times it will have a rake associated with it. And so dragonflies have some of the largest sperm compared to their body size. And so it's pretty easy for them to put in a rake-like structure and just rake out from her reproductive tract any sperm that happens to be sitting in there. And so if he comes up to the female, he rakes out all of the competitor sperm, and then he puts his in there. So that's kind of interesting. Sounds painful, but it probably isn't. Another example is salamanders. I don't know how much y'all know about salamanders, but what the male does is he'll deposit a spermatophore on the ground, and then the female will come over and she'll lower the cloaca on top of the spermatophore, break off the little sperm packet, and then take off with it, essentially. That's the way they reproduce. And so the male doesn't want her to pick up any sperm packets that don't belong to him, right? And so sometimes what he'll do after she picks up the sperm packet is she'll wrestle her, flip her over, and then cement her cloaca shut. And that keeps her from being able to pick up any sperm packets. Now, this is not permanent for lots of reasons. The babies have to be able to get out at some point, for example. She also needs to get rid of waste products or she'll die. And so this is a temporary plug. However, the idea is that the plug stays in place long enough that his sperm fertilizes the majority of her eggs. Okay. Another thing that can happen is what I've got termed here as homosexual mating. which you find in some hemipterans, which I believe they talk about in entomology. Some of y'all might be in entomology. You talk about this species.
Sometimes there's a fungus that causes it too. It's crazy.
So in this case, the male is so small that he can't compete for the females. And so he just kind of slyly swims over to one of the big dominant males, puts a little hole in his body, puts his sperm into the male, and then his sperm swims through that male's body to his testes, so that every time he has sex with a female, he gives his sperm and that little guy's sperm to the female. So it's a really roundabout, that's why you got a whole paragraph there, roundabout way of doing it. Pretty sneaky.
What about through the body wall of the female part? That's traumatic.
She won't let him nearby, I would guess. He's not a dominant male, right? So she's gonna recognize him as a male and be like, nah. Because he's too small to get her attention. I mean, remember, she's strongly influenced by female choice. So she's trying to pick the biggest, baddest, strongest one that has the best genes for her offspring. All right, then I like this one. Sometimes, I think it's salamanders do this, but there are other species as well. After they have sex with the female, they'll squirt her with something that smells bad. So that's what that means by anti-aphrodisiac scent. So something that is appalling, that turns off the males so that they don't want to have sex with her. They're like, ugh, man, where has she been?
There's also like kind of the opposite of that. Or like I know wild boars, like their saliva, they'll rub it over females because it can like speed up, like get them to actually go into their like.
That's not related to this though. That's different. That would have to do like I mentioned that the mice and rats, when the populations get low, the males can secrete pheromones to increase reproduction. That's a different idea. That's not sperm competition. I don't have humans listed on here, but there was some research that came out when I was in grad school about human sperm. And so when a male makes sperm, they're not all exactly the same. You have different shapes of sperm. Some of them are for speed, but other ones are like blocker sperm. So it's like a football team. So you have some blockers that'll kind of intercept any competitor sperm that's in the female's reproductive tract, allowing your fast one to speed through and try to get to the egg first. And they identified more than that. That's just the ones I remember. But there are some different forms of sperm that have some different capabilities that the males and humans make. So this is a very, very long, complicated, you could take a whole course in it in grad school just about sperm competition if you want to. It's a pretty fun topic. Next, we're going to talk about 2 hypotheses related to sexual selection. But that was what I was going to hold until Monday, so I actually did take the whole period today. But should be able to finish in 20 to 30 minutes on Monday and then take questions. So now you just need your calculator and your homework assignment. And you have an hour to work at it. I've got the key, of course. And I'll get out the sign-up sheet if you do want to grab a calculator.